So you may have been taught that the reason that we have leap years is that the time it takes the Earth to go around the sun once is actually 365.25 days. So every 4 years, we add an extra day to compensate for that little 0.25. And we do this in order so that the calendar year doesn't become desynchronized from the seasons, right? So that we're not having winter in the middle of June or something like that. But this is actually slightly inaccurate. The time it takes the Earth to go around the sun once, or a tropical year, is actually 365.2422 days, which is actually 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds. If we celebrated a leap year every 4 years, this would actually be enough of a discrepancy to cause problems within a relatively short time frame, within like 100 years. So we actually don't have a leap year every 4 years under the Gregorian calendar. But before we get to that, let's go back a little bit. Up until the year 1582, many parts of the world observed the Julian calendar, which did have a leap year every 4 years. But then it came along Pope Gregory the Eighth. And there was a big problem in the church, right? Because the calendar year... because the Julian calendar was slightly inaccurate, the calendar year was becoming desynchronized from the vernal equinox, because vernal equinoxes happen exactly once every tropical year. And in fact, tropical years can actually be calculated by measuring the time it takes to go from one vernal equinox to the next vernal equinox. But this was a big problem. Because of the calculation of the date of Easter, right? In the church, Easter is calculated. It's done by taking the first Sunday that happens after the first full moon that happens on or after the vernal equinox. And I think the vernal equinox is just assumed to be March 21st. But this could be a problem, right? If the calendar year is becoming desynchronized from the actual vernal equinox, that means potentially they could be celebrating Easter on the wrong day. And this was sort of, causing a problem in the church at the time. So in 1582, in October of 1582, Pope Gregory the Eighth introduced the Gregorian calendar, which modified the average calendar year to make it more accurate to the tropical year. So what the Gregorian calendar does is it has a leap year in every year that is divisible by 4, except for years that are both divisible by 100 and not divisible by 400. Okay, so the years 1900 and the years 2100, for example, they are divisible by 4, except they are also divisible by 100 and not by 400. So the years 1900 and 2100 are both not leap years. On the other hand, the years 2000 and the years 1600, or the years 2400, if you want to go forward, are both of those, all of those years are in fact leap years because they are divisible by 4. And even though they are all divisible by 100, they are not divisible by 400. So they are divisible by 400. So they do have a leap year. I feel like it's more confusing than it has to be. So the year 2000 was a leap year because even though it's divisible by 100, it's also divisible by 400. So it is a leap year. This makes it so that 97 out of 400 years are leap years, which makes the average year 365.2425 days, which you might realize that is still slightly inaccurate from the tropical year, which is 365.2422 days. But it's close enough to not cause a problem for a while. It's like 26 seconds out of sync with the tropical year, but it's close enough. I also wanted to bring up the revised Julian calendar, which I think is really interesting. So even though Pope Gregory VIII introduced the Gregorian calendar in 1582. Eastern Orthodox churches still observed the Julian calendar up until the early 1900s. But by then, in 1923, there was a Serbian scientist named, I should have looked up how to pronounce his name, Milutin Milankovic. Yeah. But he introduced the revised Julian calendar as a replacement to the Julian calendar, which is both more accurate than the Julian and the Gregorian calendars. So the way the revised Julian calendar works is it has a leap year in every year that is divisible by 4, except for years that are both divisible by 100 and do not have a remainder of either 200 or 600 when divided by 900. So it's even more confusing. So the year 2000 under the revised Julian calendar is a leap year because if you divide 2000 by 900, you get a remainder of 200. By contrast, the year 2100 is not a leap year because when you divide it by 900, you get a remainder of 300. Take the year 2800, for example. The year 2800 is a leap year under the Gregorian calendar, right? Because even though it's divisible by 100, it is also divisible by 400. So 2800 is a leap year under the Gregorian calendar. But the year 2800, if you divide it by 900, you get a remainder of 100. So it is not a leap year under the revised Julian calendar. So the revised Julian calendar has 218 leap days every 900 years, which means that the average year under the revised Julian calendar is 365.2422 days. It's still about like 2 seconds off from the tropical year, but you know what? You can't have everything. That's what I'm learning from this. However, despite the revised Julian calendar being more accurate, no countries actually adopted the revised Julian calendars. Almost all countries now observe the Gregorian calendar, except for a few. Although, however, some Eastern Orthodox churches do observe the revised Julian calendar. So it's not completely pointless. So that's why we don't have leap years every 4 years. I mean, it's kind of pointless to know that. Most of us probably will be dead in 2100 anyways.